Hi, welcome to Fundamentals for Startups, a CoMotion Labs production. My name is Sari Vimonchalau. I am the CoMotion Labs manager at the Hardware Incubator, and I am your host for today. CoMotion Labs is a multi-industry incubator program hosting early-stage startups and innovations from both inside and outside the UW community. We provide critical infrastructure and opportunities for learning, mentoring, and networking. We have 3 incubators at 2 locations on campus. At Fluke Hall, we have the Hardware Incubator and the Life Science Incubator. Here at Startup Hall, we have the Technology Incubator. If you are a founder looking for a community to help your startup grow and flourish, we'd love to talk to you. Fundamentals for Startup is an open lecture series on topics related to entrepreneurship. Every week, we bring in experts to share insights, inspire action, and offer space for questions. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to find all of the Fundamentals for Startups presentation, and visit CoMotion's website to keep up with future events. Today, I'm excited to introduce Amish Patel. He's the founder and managing director of Conduit Venture Labs, a studio for companies working on hardware-enabled machine learning. He'll share tips on navigating your startup from day one all the way through to product launch. Welcome, Amish.
Awesome, thanks. I like these pens. Awesome. Can everyone hear me? Thanks. I was walking in today. I haven't been here in a while, even though I've been in the city for 17 years. But every time you walk into a university building, no matter where you are in the world, I think they smell the same. It's the walls and the flooring and the elevators that are kind of in between. Okay, cool. I think we can jump over to the slides. I'll keep it to maybe it's 20-30 minutes of just me rambling about stuff, and then just have a discussion. So let me just introduce me. I think today I want to really focusing on the intersection of physical and digital, and really where hard tech or sensory tech, robotics, and AI ML, that's where my focus is and has always been. I didn't know it was, but it is now. And really just sharing some of the normal, but basically 99% things that hardware or hard tech or real world tech entrepreneurs face. So I just want to go through a bunch of the pitfalls, the learnings, the beatings I've taken, things that when you're thinking about going from idea to scale, just the common entrepreneurial pitfalls around hard tech, and then talk a little bit about Conduit, just in 5 seconds on that, and how we're trying to address those things as a community and as a platform. And then really I want to open it up, hear what people are working on, and we can talk about where you're hitting a pitfall or you didn't even know that was one yet, and that's usually the case. But let's dive in. I don't know if that sounds good. Otherwise, you guys take over and tell me what you like. So a little bit about me. Canadian, born in Toronto. I went to the University of Toronto where I did my undergrad and master's in human-computer interaction and neural networks, computer science. Didn't think neural networks were going to be a thing that I used ever, and didn't for a while. Worked with some amazing professors like Professor Hinton and Bill Buxton and a few others, and that's what brought me out here in 2006. I'm getting to that age. What year were
you working on neural networks?
I wasn't working on it. I was getting educated in it. What years were I working or learning neural networks? That would be 2001 to 2004. It wasn't called anything else back then, so we didn't have all these cool phrases. But yeah, so again, focusing my academic career in human-computer interaction side of things, so really about handwriting recognition, multi-touch computing, in the early days. We were using diamond touch tables and projection lights, didn't have a lot of capacitive screens back then. But that brought me out here. So came out to Microsoft, column number 3, spent about 10 years there, working on a myriad of products. Started out in the old, you guys are not old enough, maybe 1 or 2 people in here who know what a tablet PC XP edition is. But started my career in tablet PC, which was a small group incubating touch and handwriting recognition technologies. Was a PM there, working on, again, what is multi-touch and pen together. So we built things like OneNote and snipping tool, if you ever use that on, I think that's still around in Windows. That was like some intern projects that I worked on. Kept on doing the touch interface work. Of course, the industry got more mature. iPhone, things were coming out with more touch-enabled screens, sometimes still fingernails, not fingers. So I ended up working on Zune, if you guys know what Zune is. Kept on working on Windows and making Windows touchable all the way through Windows 8. And then I moved over to Xbox, where I worked more on the computer vision side. Again, natural inputs, so Connect was deep in incubation. We launched Connect 1. We were working on the Connect 2 sensor, the time-of-flight system. And I moved over from engineering to design to run a kind of a hybrid team that would think about, like, what do we do with this skeletal tracking platform other than, like, dance and work out in front of your TV? Half of that team ended up becoming HoloLens under Alex, and I continued to go on to the launch of Xbox One. And then I did my last stint in my career there inside of hardware. So the kind of the imperative came down to, let's go work on wearable technologies, the Fuel Band and Fitbit. Most of you guys are too young to know what the Fitbit was, a little clip on your shoe back in the day, and kind of the wearable technology world was kind of emerging. And we wanted to go incubate a lot of things. The PPG sensor, you see in lots of devices now, as well as, like, what does it mean to be a wrist-based all-way wearable, right? Apple Watch wasn't out yet. So we went and incubated that team. I had no clue what I was doing. I kind of, like, was around hardware and maybe industrial design. Got put into this hardware organization with a budget and go figure it out. Luckily, they had that thing called Microsoft Research, so there was like a lot of, that's where the science came from, but trying to build a wearable with a display that had all these sensors that did all these other things was, yeah, I didn't know what injection molding was. I don't know what mechanical engineering, even electrical engineers did all day. So it was an education of all educations, and it was great. So did that for 2 generations, also built Microsoft Health as part of that solution. And then I left. I left in 2016 to join the, how do I continue building health and fitness products after getting kind of this experience in Microsoft Band, which was really about, like, wow, we can build technology to, like, help people. That's cool. Like, a lot of these other things were big platform products, right? And so you don't really get to go vertical and go deep. And when we built Band, you know, you'd get really cool emails from people saying, like, this changed my life. I feel like I want to live longer. I'm exercising. I'm doing these things. So I stayed on that journey. I started a company called Catalyst here in Seattle, which is still out there. It's a full-body wearable device. It's an FDA 510K device that uses muscle stim to enhance a strength workout. So that company is, I think, like 40 million in or 50 million in. My co-founder still runs it. But we incubated it here, and it's a hybrid hardware-software product. Took that from 0 to 1.5 to 2. I'll talk about what that means for those who don't know. And really to 0 to Series A in the financing terms. I jumped out of that, and I hung out with my boy Andre here. I jumped over to Visus, where I was a VP of technology working on some physical digital stuff. So the team was crushing building, again, another UW company, right? This amazing mechanical FEM model-based materials and science engineering-based product. And I was kind of brought in to build a small squad team of like 3 or 4 software folks to put sensors and computer vision and enable the designers to build better, more accurate products. And so we did things like head scanning using your iPhone to get precision fitting, while the rest of the engineering team was working on kind of lattice technologies and 3D printing and all those other things. So it was a fun year and change. And then I jumped over to another UW CoMotion company called Proprio, both Dr. Sam Browd companies, if people know Dr. Browd. Jumped over to Proprio in the early days. I think there was like 8 people, maybe 9, to play the CPTO role. So really focused on, Gabe and the team had this phenomenal technology prototype. How do we take prototype and move it into actual product? If you guys are familiar with Proprio, it's pretty crazy. And so, how do you take a 22 camera light field array that you want to build a surgical navigation product in and take that from idea all the way through designing it, getting it to FDA, actually building a product that has utility that people want to pay for. So that was awesome. And during the pandemic was also a really hard thing. And now Conduit Venture Labs, and we'll get into that later. So that's kind of my career journey. It's kind of random, but it's all very much 0 to start and launch. And then I get bored and I move on to the next thing. So I'm trying to turn that into my career for the rest of my life. Okay, so I'm going to spend 10, 15 minutes kind of just talking about what are all the traditional traps and challenges? And I'll just kind of like tee them up from stuff we're building at Conduit to the beatings along the way, the stories from other hard tech entrepreneurs that you guys all know, or products that are out there and that failed, and probably listen to the podcast about them and see similar traps. But they're very not evident to entrepreneurs in the early days. Repeat entrepreneurs who've taken the hard tech or the real world tech, I say beatings or scars, understand them, and that's why they become battle tested, and you see usually repeat hardware entrepreneurs succeed in the second or the third. But how do we enable this generation of folks who want to build for the real world to identify those pitfalls and get the support that they need to try to avoid them? Most of the time, you don't even know what they are. I didn't know what they were. I had this old Microsoft machine that took care of all these things. I just built the thing, and and then I got into the startup world, and they were like, "What?" Oh my God. And I got prepared through the Microsoft world, so I got exposure. But once you're alone and you only have 5 people and limited capital, how do you navigate the things that are probably going to kill you? So I like to bucket. There's a million we could talk about, and we could talk about this for 10 hours. But I like to think about we're focused on idea to market. So what are the 3 kind of major categories? Inventor syndrome is no more evident in the hardware world than it is in any other place. I think it's part of humanity. It's what we want to do. We want to create tools and build things. What are the 2 ingredients, of early stage hard tech success? And then knowing that, version 1.5 is really your 1.0, and that the thing that really is going to get you isn't building the first one, it's figuring out how to build 10,000 of them. I think amazing products, Jawbone, all these other companies, phenomenal product, lots of customers, died in financing their growth. And they died because of their debt capital strategy, right? So it's these things you don't think about. It's not always product. It's things that won't necessarily affect a software startup, but will a physical tech startup. So let's share some of these. All right. I keep them simple, by the way. So inventor syndrome. If I build it, they will come. It's the number one, I think I do it every day, right? I think it's more human, and when you're talking about, let's say, hardware or hard tech, it's how we've evolved as a species. We've built tools, we've invented things, things in the real world out of atoms, and forged them to further our innovation, to change society. I think it's ingrained in our DNA to just imagine, if I could just build that thing, I know everyone's gonna want it, right? And I think that is a 100% true statement when it comes to hard tech entrepreneurship. And again, I worked at Microsoft, so we did that as an institution, right? We did not ask the customer, we just built stuff. And I added the caveat of there's the pain, there's the empathy. If I just build it, I know they're gonna, if I want it, they want it. That leads to also, if I could just raise enough money to build the prototype, I'm gonna figure it all out. And it's again, I wanna manifest the thing in my head is generally a trap. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It means where you're starting on should it exist and why should it exist has not been thought through. We never start there, right? And so it leads you to kind of this general kind of perspective, right? I think we're all naturally, especially the engineers in the room and the scientists and the logic, literally the logic-driven folks, right? Like myself. We focus on how we're going to do things, and then we'll figure out the rest later, right? And we don't even think about the other stuff. And the inverse is true for successful startups. I think studios and processes, you guys have learned design thinking and probably how to use things like canvases and how to think about jobs to be done and these other tools that are now emerged in ways to talk about. You should really be focusing on the who, what, where, when, and most importantly, why, right? At Conduit, we always say why now, why this, and why you, right? From a founder perspective. And why don't we spend all our time talking about that and not about how you're going to go do it? How is assuming there's a problem that needs to be solved, right? And that's a secondary bit. But we always start with, if I could just build it, I know everyone's going to want it. I know if I want it, it's going to work. But that might be true, but there may not be a startup there. There may not be a business model there. And there may not be a lot of people like you that want it. Doesn't mean it shouldn't exist. It just might not be a venture scale startup, right? I'll add one more point on this, and then I'm going to go through these fast because I kind of want to use them as fodder for conversation, right? The last point I made is kind of a really like a double click for me, and I'm learning it now again. Over and over again, I learn the same mistakes. Which is not all, I'm talking about hardware specifically or physical tech or the mixture of the hardware software, so things for the real world. The majority of things aren't what we call venture scale. And so what I mean by that is like we work at Conduit with a lot of academic institutions, corporates, as well as in our own portfolio of building to help them sort. And I didn't understand this until maybe the last couple of years of going through the startup game like intensely, which is there's different paths to getting your thing to the world. So assuming that the world needs it and the world wants it, and it has utility and it's solving a problem, let's pretend that's true. The way to get your impact and your reach isn't always, I gotta go raise a bunch of venture capital money. And in the hardware world, that's like even more so true. Because one, there's other funding mechanisms, which you guys know, to help you get to whatever the milestone is to prove either there's IP here, I need to patent it, I need to build it, I need to scale it, I need to build a lot of them to prove that people want it. These are all different permutations. But fundamentally, you know, in most cases, I would say, intellectual property is created for an invention. Let's call it a widget, right? The widget does something out of a great utility, and it can serve a great market. But you getting it from widget to 1 million people is this massive journey, and in many ways is not always the most efficient path to getting it to the world. The more efficient path might be, let me get it to a milestone where like I've proven that it works and the engineering is there and that like I could go do that. But the reality is why wouldn't I go work with this corporate entity? Or why wouldn't I go work with this larger institution to scale it, right? And I think like Aproprio is a great example of someone who's trying to disrupt that conversation, right? Which is, it could go either path, right? So the med device world, right, as an example, they outsource their R&D to us, right? The entrepreneurs. You don't see a lot of Medtronics and Strykers and these guys building Aproprio-like teams in their basement. Right? They don't have a lot of like AI and computer vision engineers like building novel, crazy stuff, right? The difference is like, Microsoft on the software side, like, yeah, they have an AI group and they're gonna go create tools and they're gonna go do some stuff and they're gonna innovate in their own backyard to create value, right? But what happens in like the med device world, for instance, or the big hard tech world is let the entrepreneurial community take all the risk, and there's some capital for that in venture capital and government grants and SIBRs and all these other things. And once they get to a point to commercialize or scale, I'm the better vehicle. So they either acquire you or they become a customer of yours, et cetera, right? If you were gonna go build a better tractor, you could go do that and try to sell every single one with a salesman door to door, or at some point, you're gonna get to the point where John Deere is the place that I'm gonna scale this, right? And assuming everyone wants it to exist, right, and everyone's playing nice, right, that's your way to get to the market. And so it's not always, I need rounds and rounds of venture capital. It might be, I need to get to a certain milestone, and then I need to license my IP. I need to move into a bigger shop. I need to commercialize it in a different way. And then these ingredients become factors really early on in your plan, right? What happens after you launch? Okay, you have these different strategies, and you have to think about the capitalization strategy. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And the problem is, like with software, if I was just a SaaS person, like T.A. McCann came up here and I was just like doing his thing. I love T.A., by the way. He's like my brother. It's very easy to have, there's 3 or 4 options for SaaS, right? And there's like, these are the milestones you want to hit. But with hardware, it could be a tractor or it could be a sensor. They're very different. And each of them will have a different path. Again, making this very confusing. Which is why this is important. The 2 ingredients of early stage hard tech founder success for me and maybe like the 500 people I know in the industry, which I'm actively trying to synthesize inside of Conduit as a tool that we can all use. I say the 2 things that like the software guys, and I'm a software guy too, all of our stuff is hardware powering software. These are the 2 added things, if you're building anything in the real world, you need to invest in, okay? Who's your crew? And who's gonna pick up the phone, okay? Not necessarily always true for software. You can build a lot really quickly with a small amount of people and get it to market and test and iterate and iterate and iterate. Who your crew is because when it comes to hardware, my learning here is, again, as one who has failed, and we'll see what the other ones do, and just like taking the slog of it all, is like wisdom and time and is the ultimate capital for early stage hard tech. What I mean by that is like, on the left, you could build a pretty good early stage startup with software UX and a good product person. Like a designer, a good product, and software engineers. You could, Andre's doing this. He's trying to do both, but Andre's doing this, right? You get to experiment, you get to market, get a value prop, iterate really quickly, understand if there's value there, raise capital, and go. On the right, if you're building anything for the real world, is all the other people and disciplines you're going to need to successfully get your thing to market, right? Prototype is one thing. Product is a whole nother ballgame. And then product for scale is like the whole other thing. ME, EE, ID, PD, MPI, manufacturing, capitalization, RF, DFM, QA, firmware, CMF, go to market. In hardware, no one talks about that. That's where you die. That's where it actually fails, right? Distribution, regulatory, compliance, supply chain, right? Like hardware PMs, there's like not even that many of them to go figure out how to operationalize this. So this is why when people say like hardware is hard, I always say it's harder. But these are all the Lego bricks you're trying to like coordinate, and you're trying to like figure out when you need what. Sometimes you don't need them in the earliest stages, but you need to be planning for when you need them. And the only way to know this is to like not do it right the first time. So like I didn't know all these things when I was at Microsoft starting a whole like new division. Like a third of those were all some other group in another building that just took care of it. I didn't even know what happened in that. I was like, here's the product, I'll go to the factory, did it come back? It went into this magic box and came back, and I was like, oh, cool. Like, but when you're in startup land, like you have to either understand what these are or build a crew of people who are fractionally going to share with you what this means to you and when you should care about it. And so I say like wisdom is the most important thing in the hardware world, because there's like, it's longer projects and people who have gone through the cycle more and more, and it's a limited resource. There just aren't that many of them out there. Okay, now who picks up the phone? That's like the hardest one for especially early stage, especially if you're a first-time entrepreneur and you didn't come from corporate, honestly. Relationships with how you're gonna manufacture this thing is like complicated. And especially in the US, and especially now with foreign policy and all this other stuff happening, like it's even harder, right? To have relationship with contract manufacturers from the earliest stages, not because you need them to build a prototype. We have prototyping is like amazing now, right? But how do you take a prototype and actually get it into someone's hands, into store, into reliability, into something that they can use as a tool, right? You're not necessarily going to use printed parts and hand-screwed gaskets. You're going to have to manufacture something, right? And in this case, it's really, really hard for startups that are undercapitalized to go to a CM and knock on their door and say, hey, can I make 100 of these? And they're going to be like, what? And there's a few out there, and we work with them now and trying to get them to take smaller orders and like work with us as a portfolio. But fundamentally, like it only worked for me and the people I work with because we came from corporate. And so if you look at like hardware entrepreneurs or hard tech leaders at other places, we built relationships through these corporate entities. You know, going to Microsoft and going to Asia opened up all the doors. We did all these amazing things. We built Surface and Xbox, and it's a personal relationship. With contract manufacturing, it is about the relationship between you and the factory owner, you and the factory staff. That is why they're going to take the risk and say, hey, even though you don't have any money, I think you have a cool product, and I'm going to put some at-risk resources to help you make some. And it really is like, if you just knock on the door and set the thing, they're going to be like, I don't know how to even make money on this. How are you going to, you don't even have the money to make them. Like, it's very, very, very hard. And so like, if you guys are, any of you are building in this space, going from prototype to, forget the capital side, just someone willing to take my order, like, is very hard. And there's things that are getting better in the US, Tijuana and other places, but fundamentally it's like, it's really rough. And it's rougher now than it ever has been. And so it's really important to like, who's going to pick up your phone is, hey, I have a crew of people who they will pick up the phone for. And I'm vouching for this entrepreneur or this product, and I'm saying like, you should do a 250 unit qualification run. If you don't know what that is, that's a whole other ballgame. Because without that, you can't launch or get into store or run FCC or do these other things, right? So it's a very complicated game. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just saying, it's just like, you know, if you're an entrepreneur that can handle lots of variables, you're going to succeed, because not many people are going to go down this crazy route. Okay, last thing. And then I'll try to show you how we're trying to solve this problem. You've launched your V1 product. Launch is always an overloaded word. All different products have different versions of this. Again, can't be definitive, but we can talk about your product. But 99% of the time, your first production is not the one that's going to get you there. So in software, it's really nice. Build something, deploy it, see what happens. Doesn't work, redeploy, right? Like iterate, change, feature, A/B test. How do you do that economically, efficiently in hardware? Well, you either figured out you've made a decision in your design process, but you're locked. And you've like, actually, you know you're gonna go on with the bug in the product, but you're okay with it. And then you gotta figure out when to, one, forget capital, figure out how to do it the next time. And then while you're building it and getting it out of like design and into manufacturing, you're gonna figure out, yeah, like you can't get that cool surface that you want, or it doesn't line up and water's leaking into the gasket and you need to add glue. And like glue is the magic of all first generation hardware, by the way. I have like lots of glue and things. Liquipel, if you don't know what that is, also a magic. But like, you design your V1 because you know it's gonna fail. And your 1.5 is all those little things the year before it came out, because it's almost like a year cycle, that you're like adding to the fixes. And so generally your 1.5 or 2 is the thing you're going, okay, this one's not gonna break after 50 hours, and like the screen's not gonna pop out, and the power plug doesn't short out, right? Cool, that one's the one we're gonna put on shelf. That's the one we're gonna sell 10,000 of. That's the one that the customer's gonna rely on. Because what happens to a lot of entrepreneurs is they're like, I built a prototype, I went to an engineering firm, we DFM'd it, and we built like a proto run of 1,000 units. How are you gonna get iteration cycles on that, right? It's really, really, really hard. And the bugs are only gonna happen out there with your customer. And if you're building ag or IoT or things that are out there, that's trouble, right? So the last piece is like scale is where you succeed and fail. And again, I'm just sharing the learnings, and we can go dive deep in any of these when you want. But all these things are kind of the big considerations the founding team, the early team, the CEO has to be not concerned about, but has to have a strategy for, especially as you get closer and closer to launch. So building prototypes, great. Having customers pilot them, awesome. But how do you go from pilot to product to scale? Most startups will raise capital if their product's good and do things and get to the Series A or Series C or whatever round you want, but enough to get you through your pilot season, enough to show value and exchange of capital. But like I said earlier, yeah, things are gonna break. So like, and it's really hard to design a V1 product and know that's gonna be reliable for 10 years in the market. Like how? Unless you've done it 10 times and you've built that device 10 times, it's really, really hard. Again, the wisdom part, really important. How do you get a bunch of people who have built hardware for 30 years to like, just make sure you're not making that mistake? Way more important in the hardware world, right? So capital for hardware, it's a strategy. And it's like the number one thing outside of like the product and engineering and all the other things that's gonna be the linchpin. And fundamentally, most people think, again, if I build it, they will come. If I can get 500K, I can get to the pilot, fine. But once you go from pilot to production to scale, you have to be thinking 5 years, 10 years, right? You need to be thinking about how do I go from 1,000 units to 10,000 units if that's what you're, not all devices have that scale, but they might, right? And in that case, it's not always like, I'll just raise more money. It's like time. Things take, let's go through a factory. Factory needs multiple lines, like talking to your CM and understanding like, how much is it gonna cost and how long is it gonna take? How many people do I need to operationalize this thing? The reality is, the thing most startups, hard tech startups die on isn't great product. And honestly, manufacturing, they'll get there, you'll figure it out. If you capitalize, you'll figure it out. It's go to market, right? So with software, you put it out there and the electrons flow, it's really nice. And you have to worry about like, is it mobile, is it SaaS, is it on device? But you can maintain it. If it goes down, you can, if it's Cloudflare or whatever, like you can fix it in a relatively fast pass. You can A/B test, you can do all these things, right? The day this thing goes into a box at the factory and it's on a pallet, okay, it's gone. And for you to have the hold you want on it, again, industrial products versus consumer products are different, but generally GTM. GTM here isn't just like click and buy and it shows up on your screen, right? Like it's just cloud pushing, it's not just electrons, right? It's how do I get it there? Logistics. I gotta ship it, it's gotta get there, Okay, I got to worry about them unboxing it, setting it up, connecting to the cloud. Okay, well, is that going through Amazon? Is that distribution? Where's the margin in that? Okay, who's servicing it when it dies? Where do they ship it back to? How many trade-ins or exchanges can I live on, right? Like, what's our failure rate need to be? Do I have to fly a person out to an oil rig to go fix a sensor I've worked on a project like this. Like, yeah, so like, okay, what do I need to do to pilot it? But like the cost of maintenance. Can I remote update this thing? Is it connected to the cloud? Does it have SAT data? Can I push firmware updates, right? Okay, if so, how expensive are they? How long do they take? If I bork the device on the other end, what happens? Does that whole oil rig go down, right? Does it not work anymore? Do I have to get like, how do you think about go to market is where things fail, right? Jawbone, great example, right? The Up, phenomenal product. They died in these two things: capital strategy and how do I get 1 million armbands out to the market? These are the two things. Great podcast. I'll send it to you later if you want, on like the two founders talking about this. Most people don't think about the life of the product, the life cycle, like I just talked about. Okay, I'm shipping a device to Andre. I think it's like a 5-year thing. So the battery, does it last 5 years? Like, you're supposed to do a life cycle analysis when you ship it. There's a warranty on that. Like, how do I deal with that? Are the components even gonna last that long? Is the screen gonna fade out? Is the paint gonna not chip? Like, these are all the inputs at the beginning to figure out like how you're selling it to your customer and then how you're gonna support that thing in the field, right? Not let alone sell it, right? How you sell a med device is very different than how you ship a software product. Okay, then now, even more so, what's the death of the product, right? What's the sustainable side of this, right? Before, you would just build a bunch of shit with batteries, by my language, and then just shove it into the ecosystem or dump it in the ocean or whatever, right? Am I building it with the right plastics and silicons? Is this thing toxin-free? How does this affect the PFAS conversation? Like, how am I disposing of it? How do I tear it back apart? Like, these are all the new, now this is like the new other part of your hardware lifecycle, right? And it's really important because legislation's coming, compliance is coming, right? The FCC and UL is now, like, and I think it's important for our climate and our world, but fundamentally, like, it used to be just the life of the product and you're like, meh, I don't know, man, try to find a place to put the batteries, right? Like, that was how we dealt with it. And today it's like, no, you need to have a plan. You need to figure out how you're gonna take it back, recycle it, what kind of materials you use, really important. And then all while doing this for one product, you have to figure out what the next one is and the next SKU and have a team that's organized to support this thing for 5 to 10 years or whatever and go and engineer a new one. So when you talk about like hard tech, it's like a lot of variables and it's not as linear as you want it to be, but it can be if you just have a good mapping of when I need to worry about what. Okay. Everyone freaked out now? Is that good? Yeah? Okay, Conduit. We're trying to like sort this out for people because like we didn't have anyone to sort it out for us. And so we as a hardware community are trying to build this as a way to like give people the tools to go do this. Okay, so what are we in 5 seconds? I'm not gonna do the whole spiel. How are we time-wise? 30, perfect. We're a venture studio and we're focused at real world applications of AI and ML, right? So we're not doing carbon sequestration devices. We're not doing big deep tech. We're really doing what we're good at. Applied robotics, sensory technologies, computer vision, IoT, really taking commodity hardware technologies and applying them to real world problems. We fundamentally believe that software alone is not going to address the world's greatest challenges. Like anything in the health tech space as well, because of my background, if you can quantify something very contextually, you can drive software on top of that contextual understanding and do something really interesting with it. Proprio is a great example of this architecture, right? If I can understand what's happening, record it, turn it into a data set that I can run AI and ML on top of, I can have great impact at scale, right? For something in the real world. So quantifying the real world, analog to digital conversions, get a little ADC, and then do some magic on the digital. Okay, so what do we focus on? We call it human and planetary health and performance as a portfolio. We kind of look at the portfolio as 3 buckets: health and wellness, climate sustainability, and what we call like just spatial intelligence. How do we better understand what's happening to our planet in a very contextual way to drive near-term value and then long-term behavior change? So we can always talk about that later. Like I said at the bottom, kind of our core technologies. We're not going to mess around what we're not good at because like you, I know some of the formulas, and my team knows the formulas of all that crazy stuff I mentioned before, but we don't know the formulas of how to build a room-scale carbon sequestration device, so we're not going to go after it. What are our foundational elements? This might make sense now. All of Conduit's based on these kind of principles. What are we going to become? What are we, and what are we investing in? We want to be a company origination as a service. So like a studio, we're your co-founder. We take ideas from the idea stage, and sometimes we take it from the POC or intellectual property stage, and we run it through our playbook, and you guys have probably heard lots of studios about how we take it from idea to kind of pre-seed to like market. So we can dive into that another time, and glad to chat with you guys. But we call it origination, and it really is working with founders to be the squad around them to work through some of this stuff. We're heavily invested in wisdom and access as a strategic asset. So who's your crew and who's going to pick up the phone? That's really about de-risking. It's about having a plan that's vetted by people who've done it before, with people who are willing to say, yeah, if this comes to fruition, I will go help you do that. We have been afforded that as a founding team at Conduit, and we're trying to like institutionalize that. Conduit was born, by the way, when I left Proprio, because I worked at PSL for a little bit. I understand the model of the venture studio and like the value proposition of that, and I literally couldn't find one for me. That's why Conduit exists. I couldn't find a venture studio on the planet that was like, I want to work on IoT for the real world. I want to work on hardware plus software. And everyone's like, we don't do hardware. We don't, that's not the spiel, right? And I was like, great, I'm going to go build it with everybody that I know. Okay, so that's the middle part. And the last, even though it's kind of part of the studio, like, most of our team is working on software all the time, building the software that goes with the hardware. But we need to be our founders, hardware co-founder. Now what that means is not just what are we doing in the first stages to get to market, it's all that other stuff, right? We have to be committed long-term, beyond the spin-out phase, and we have to be like, oh, you're about to go to 10,000 units, let us run our playbooks and our knowledge and like institutionalize that over and over and over again, such that those factories know that when a Conduit company comes through their door, you guys can walk through it, right? And say, yeah, we vetted the plan, it's great. We can help de-risk these things. Like, let us be the one that makes the call, right? And then the plan that comes after that call, we write with you, right? So we're riding shotgun instead of you trying to figure out all those other disciplines. You don't need them all, but you need all of them to have input. Okay, so who are we? It's me. I create the stuff. I'm the 0 to 1 guy. My partner Susan, she's just a badass. She makes it scale. So she doesn't like doing the like come up with the ideas and figure out all the hard like the venture stuff. She likes to say, oh, you have a thing, I'll figure out how to make 1 million of them. Right? Her relationships are, she was the first employee and CEO of Beats by Dre. Before that, she commercialized tons of technologies in the audio space and the automotive space. She's the commercialization queen, right? So she's always been my buddy. And over the years, she was my crew. When I was like, I have no clue how to build 10,000 of these. She's like, I got it. I got all these people. I got all these factories. Like, okay, cool. And this is what she loves doing. She's in the spreadsheets. She's designing roadmaps, right? That's what she likes to do. And then Adeline comes from BCG and Fortive, and she makes sure people want it. She runs our studio. She runs our playbooks, our value proposition, our VOC, our design. She runs the validation that this thing should exist. So that first part of the problem. Like, not if I build it, they will come. It's, hey, there's a need, and hardware is needed for this solution, including software. We have 2 software companies right now that turned out they didn't need hardware for the solution. So we canned it, put it down the roadmap, called it next later, and great, awesome. Who's our crew? There's 180 of us now. I think we'll be at 210 by the end of the year around the world. I went and got everyone I knew in the hardware space because none of us had a home to give other people that wisdom. There was no institution for it. So I went, a few faces in here like Per and a few others, right? Maybe Al Steffen and Todd Holmdahl and a bunch of locals. But I went and got the stack. All those disciplines that you saw on the right, I was like, I need 10 around the world that are like veteran folks who are willing to just donate their time. Some will donate capital, some will donate services, like all these other things. But I basically asked them all, would you give me 4 hours a quarter to work with a bunch of startups that we have in-house or we're helping accelerate to de-risk these things? Look at their plan, open a door, tell them where they're going to get smacked across the face, right? Because that's what I was lucky to have that, and I know we have to like pay it forward. So we invest heavily in this institution, and they're everywhere. We synthesize all their learnings. AI is fun, man. You get these guys to talk about their life experiences in front of an LLM, and you do it over and over again on a bunch of topics around manufacturing and capitalization and building a team and capital strategy, you start synthesizing it into what we use in our playbooks. You start taking their wisdom and you start seeing patterns. But in the hardware world, we're very divided and conquered. There's founders everywhere, and we're all just like beating it out one by one. And it's like there's not that many of us compared to the software founders, and we're just grinding it out. But the community is tight. It's very empathetic, right? Because it's like even harder. So when you meet a hardware founder meets another hardware founder, it's a different level than the software guys. Just telling you now. It's like I'll help you, man. I just know how hard it was, right? And that's kind of like what we're trying to bring to other entrepreneurs. And then we have a bunch of people who pick up the phone for us. And we went down to Asia and Tijuana and, from the Microsoft days and said, look, you guys usually just work with Apple, great. But we as a portfolio are going to bring you a bunch of companies. Are you going to help them? And they said, yeah, because we just have relationships, right? We know that they will trust the products we bring them, and they might want to put equity or capitalize some of the things as well. So it's all about trading on our relationships. Okay, and lastly, literally the last slide, how do we do this? I don't know, it's kind of dark. There's lots of stuff we could share about playbooks and everything else. But I think the thing to note, I'm going to walk out of frame, y'all, is most venture studios will kind of help you with the origination, will kind of get you to this new co-formation and kind of spin you out and help you get capitalized, act as a board member, kind of help you with talent, help you with de-risking, but they kind of want to get off as quickly as possible because they want to move on to their next one. In our case, two things. We only work for common stock, so founder stock. We don't take preferred, and we don't want to squash you. We only get paid when you get paid because we're all founders, and we know that. It's a good deal. Alignment, empathy. And two, we know that your hardest struggle isn't at, I built the pilot, and I got to V1, or I'm getting close to revenue. It's down here. Right? Everything I talked about, right? It's how do I get to 10,000? The supply chain broke. I need a factory. How do I find debt capital? Who are my team members? I need execs who know hardware. What vendor should I work with? That agency's charging me $270 an hour. That's freaking crazy, right? How do we lower that cost? For us, selfishly, we want to protect our shares, our investment. We want to protect you. So to do that, we stay on all the time. We have all of this commercialization practice, which we call Conduit Beacon, and we just continue to de-risk as our board member and our investment in our equity. Because at the end of the day, the thing that dilutes hardware companies, Andre and I talked about this earlier, is the fact that you have to keep on going out for more money because you didn't foresee the challenges. And guess what? Everyone starts getting smaller and smaller, and all of a sudden, all the employees are getting less and less of the share, but you're doing all the hard work. And so, yeah, the capital allocators out there know this, and they'll take advantage of it, and they'll price the rounds accordingly. We're trying to be a sidecar to this conversation, saying no, we have a factory, and this is why we need this much capital, and we know what we're going to go do with it. And we're trying to take all that knowledge and all that wisdom and say it's backed by these folks that you know and you've invested in before. Okay, we're going to go to Q&A time, but I'll ask one question because I've been talking for half an hour or 40 minutes. How many builds will you do at the factory before you get your first product to market? Guesses. One. Let's show of hands. Okay, no. Two? Does anyone even three? Okay, we got one. One guy's listening. Three. Four? Okay, so four. And then? Seven? No. I mean, look, different products have different things. I think prototypes that aren't production scale is one thing. You generally are going to do anywhere from 2 to plus. Let's just say that. It just matters what product it is, right? If there's complications in engineering, is it plastics, is it injection molding, it's going to be different. But I think most entrepreneurs think I have a 3D printed prototype and I'll make 10,000 of those and they're going to last in the market. And I think the point I was trying to make here is it's multiple runs, and you have to be capitalized for it, and you need a schedule for it. And fundamentally, how do you do a small build, learn from it, iterate, and iterate, and how do you bring some of that agility to the hardware world? It means you need a partner, small run factory, small shop. Doesn't have to be a big CM that will help you do these smaller runs to help you learn before you actually have the thing that can ship. Okay, there's a lot of ranting. Open for questions, and there's a mic back there. So I think a show of hands helps.
One of the things about the software world is it evolves very quickly. So this wisdom and knowledge that is hard fought in this world you described, how much does it change over time?
Not as fast as software, I guess. I think
Yeah.
you can say software's two sides. There's the technology, and then there's the operation, like the execution and the operationalizing it, right? And I think like the operational side, that wisdom is experience and org design and execution, and like that side is always going to be experience driven, and the technology is always going to be this fast iterative loop, especially now. In the hardware world, I mean, like 3D printing and prototyping changed a lot of like the formula, right? It changed a lot of like I can get a lot done quickly, and I would say some of the old wisdom doesn't understand that, right? And especially like the corporate wisdom is now getting to understand that, right? Because it's a little bit different. And I think Microsoft got there when I was leaving, roughly, right? But the institutional knowledge of like how to form atoms, right? Like how to run a production line. There's little things that software's helped accelerate those things, but fundamentally, like you're pushing atoms, right? And so that wisdom kind of holds, right? If you're a person who's run a hardware division for 20 years, fundamentally, like the chunks are the same, the cycles can get faster, but what are the warning signs down the field? Those don't generally change. How much capital do I need? How big is the team going to be? How am I going to deploy it? Those are very similar. Software's helping, AI's helping, but it's coming. It's like kind of there, right? Like sales, deployment, those kind of the GTM side of things is getting accelerated. But the core wisdoms of like, how do I take this CAD and like turn it into 1 million units on a pallet? It hasn't been synthesized yet. Because if you think about it from a consumer electronics or, let's not talk about silicon and chips for a second. You're talking 20 years, 30 years, right? Like the mouse, 80s, maybe, call that the big first consumer product in the electronic space. With toys, all that other stuff, there's also all that stuff. I'm talking about like smart tech, right? Stuff with EE and boards in it, right? So you have 30 years of wisdom, maybe 40. And that hasn't fundamentally changed too much. It's just getting more refined.
Okay, thanks. Maybe that's a reason to go into it. So it doesn't.
Yeah, it's just I love it. It's great.
Thanks for your talk. I was able to connect because I've done a lot of work in system manufacturing concept to commercialization. One of the things you touched and that got me intriguing is the exit strategy for a software is going to be very different from a hardware, simply because in hardware you got to think whether you want to build the second company, which is taking it into manufacturing. And that goes through 3 cycles because you saw whether you're going to be a small scale, a medium scale, and assuming a happy ending, it's going to get absorbed by some company. They could absorb it at any stage from the license to where you are, you got a small number of units per year. With the software, it's a very different. It's just your resource augmentation and scaling on that side. Having been through the journey, how do you look at kind of like planning? Because you never know whether you're going to exit 7 years from now or 5 years from now. So you don't stop because hardware needs plenty of planning.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely double click on that. I'd love to double click on that. So we have like a playbook around commercialization. So we on the Conduit side, and that's really like where a lot of the Susans and the fellows, like we have 2 sides. We do this company creation, we build things, we engineer, we do startups. We're also a fund that needs to return, right? So timing is really important. What kind of companies we build is important. Fundamentally, we call them the commercialization pathways, right? One is like let's call everything at the POC level to start, right? So maybe a POC and a patent. Maybe that's like the best solution in the hardware world, especially when we're talking about institutions, right? We spend a lot of time early trying to figure that out as validation. So we're doing something now with like HSS, right? Big medical IP conglomerate. They've come to us and said, hey, this is a sector we don't do. Could you go and take this and figure out the pathway? And so part of that is us picking up the phone and we call the endpoints, right? And not saying we have a thing. If this thing existed, why is it important to your portfolio? Kind of back channeling. But it is back channeling, right? hey, I think there's room in this ag space. I also know that John Deere might think it's in this space, but how far apart are we in this conversation? At what revenue or scale or impact do they want it to be validated before they acquire it? Because you were 100% right that I think like 80% of hard tech or hard tech plus software solutions are all M&A, right? The ones that IPO are either med device or like very specific specialty products, but they're usually powering something else.
You don't have to answer, but I have a follow-up comment. From the other side, your software, if it's typically picked up by the tech world, the maturity and acquisition is a completely different style than the traditional companies who might like, okay, let's wait a couple of more years, let's wait 1 more year. And that slowdown can be very infuriating to the startup because,
Yeah.
What do you do?
I don't have one answer for that. I mean, it's the right question though, if you guys heard it, right? Like that's the risk, that's the concern. What we do on the Conduit side, like we've shelved companies where that's a problem. We didn't even start them. We decided not to start them because of that, right? So we kind of back channel the gap and understand the willingness to M&A if it existed. No one's committing to anything, but we can say is that a 5, 10, or 15 year. That comes to capital strategy, right? But if your capital strategy is not filling the gap, you have a problem. You're going to get squeezed on valuation. People are going to leave. You can't iterate because you don't have capital to build the next version. And you get in that like zombie mode for a hardware company. And that's in that like 20 million, 50 million space. And then they're going to pick you off for nothing, right? So it's like, how do you continue to generate IP is a problem. For us, it's like we kind of do that as part of the validation. So just like we would validate with a customer, we kind of validate that track to commercialization. And if there's nothing there, we just don't do it. Like, it's not for us, right? Yeah. And ours is a 10-year window. Yeah.
Thanks for the talk. I wanted to ask a question if you could just dive a little deeper into your decision to leave Microsoft. I imagine at that time you probably pretty comfortable there and inflicted some pain on yourself willingly. So what was that decision like? Did you already have an idea in mind for your startup? And then on the flip side, what was kind of like the first break or like kind of the first unlock you had for your starting your own company?
Yeah, great question. I haven't heard that question like ever, so that's good. Yeah, Microsoft days, I was there during the crazy times, so like 2005 to 2016. I would say a few things. Yeah, I think what happened was like if you look at my little career path there, and there's a lot of nuance, it wasn't normal. I got to jump around to like multiple projects. I mean, from engineering to design to hardware. Like I had no right to do that, but because like my thing was like start new things guy, like you kind of got away with it, and then you just fake it till you make it. It was kind of the deal. But got to the point at Band where we were working on health tech and fitness tech at a time where I was like starting to become really passionate about it. And one of the big things that we saw was this gap at the time, 2016-ish, 15, 16 era, between strength training and like kind of all the other stuff that wearables are doing, anaerobic, run more, bike, the cardio stuff. And if you start double clicking on that, it's a big health imperative, especially as people get older. You guys are fine, but the rest of us, we're losing muscle mass daily. And so that got me passionate. So Microsoft opened my eyes to the world outside of Microsoft in the real world, a little bit more in the health and fitness world, which is not a normal Microsoft thing, right? We're building platforms for big problems, for enterprises, for Windows and Xbox, and these are different things, right? So one, that was like, okay, I got a glimpse of like, oh no, I like impact and passion. That trigger went off. And then two, I was a weirdo. So I had a team of 100 people, and it was like all mixed disciplines. I didn't have a PM, a hardware guy, an engineer. I had like I had a whole team of people. I had to change all their names in the like Outlook to like experience engineer. Because like in that world, you couldn't just be a random team of people building a thing. And so personally, it was like, okay, if we're going to shut down this program, which we were going to do, Microsoft's going to Azure, right? We're not going to consumer. So I want to go towards solving real world problems in consumer and health and fitness. And two, I didn't have a place. So if we're shutting down Band, I would have gone with Microsoft Health and I would have ran a PM team. And honestly, there's probably lots of Microsoft people watching this. I would have made PowerPoints decks for the rest of my life, right? And I wouldn't have been able to be a designer and think about new concept as much as I wanted to at that point. I was probably 33. would have been great to stay. The stock price is great now, but it wasn't back then. So but I left because of passion. And then the second part of your question was, yeah, I found that strength training was an under-addressed market, especially back then. There was CrossFit and do-it-yourself. Right? Maybe bar for women, kind of on the flexibility side, and there was zero in the women's space. And so I was like, let's go solve this problem. And Catalyst is a eStim FDA device that 20-minute workout, no joint impact, yada, yada, yada. And that's why we did it. And honestly, I started it while I was there. So kind of used the research from the big mothership to find a value proposition, had a friend, and some of my team joined me after I left. Yeah.
Thanks.
I would say the last thing, I'll add to this, a little tidbit of wisdom I like to share. It's a lot easier, if you have a really good idea, a great value prop, you're a passionate engineer, and you can show the world needs this, not if I build it, they will come, you'll find capital. You'll find people who will want to support you with grants and money, and will join your team by walking with their feet and saying, I like this mission too. That's very hard in corporate. The number of times I started all those incubation projects, half of them you never saw, right, on this list, and was told to do it, and then spent years convincing the people that told me to do it, is very hard, right? And so at some point you're like, what am I doing, right? You're asking me to invent some stuff and create some novel, cool experiences, and then every week I spend convincing you to do the thing you told me to do. That's not the startup world. The entrepreneurial world is hey, you're doing something great. I kind of want to invest in this something great because I believe that you're going to be able to do it, and there's an opportunity, and there's a business. It's a lot easier. And so as the type of person I am, the day I left, I thought I was going to be scared to do this crazy startup thing. It was so much easier. Because if you're doing the right thing, people will join you. They will. It's very hard in corporate. It really is. Sorry, Microsoft people. It's different now. Very different now there, right?
So you were making comparisons about whether you're building a product or building a company, and that seems like it could be hard to determine what your goals should actually be. And you also raised the question of answering the question of not how but why. So when you're thinking about why, are you and you're thinking about the criteria for answering why, are you thinking when these timelines are so long, are you thinking more about it as a product, or are you thinking more about it as a field of technology, or are you thinking about it as a potential company?
I think, great question. We don't think about the how, even though in our head it's always there. Right? You're always envisioning it's going to be a sensor, there's a thing, it's on the roof. That's what we do. So you have to always put that in the back of the head. I have a great team that tells me to shut up, right? But we have various rules how we write our concepts down, right? We don't talk about how for month 2. Now, even though I'm sketching it out, I'm doing it anyway, that's what's going to happen. But we don't focus on that as validation. We only focus on is there a problem? We call it IFD, right? Is the intensity, frequency, and density of this problem that we found in the world big enough to build a company on top of? And then, if that value proposition holds, of whatever this solution, the value prop is a solution and a set of pains, right? A problem, pain, and a solution. Then let's go figure out how. And like I mentioned earlier, we started with a project that's about almost spinning out now in the environmental toxins exposomic space. And it started out as wouldn't it be cool if we built this hardware product and then built this software platform on top of it? That thing is now in the Series A roadmap. It is a pure software play because I realized what the customer needed wasn't that, even though it'd be cool. That's wouldn't it be, that's cool 5 years from now, right? And so we don't focus on the how, but we know that if we had to build something physical, we're pretty good at it. So that's our advantage, right? And so we really look at how could software solve this problem? And then how does hardware how can it only be solved by having a hardware enabler?
Yeah, I was asking actually with regard to the why, when you're trying to answer the question of why should we move forward, or why should we just pause this or let it go? Are you thinking about, does this have to be able to become a company, or does this just have to be able to become a product?
No. It's a company origination platform. We don't build products, right? Products will advise to kill it or package it up and IP it or give it to somebody else to go and put in their product line. Products turn into other people's IP that they can put into their pipeline. Companies have business model, scale, trend, venture outcomes, et cetera. We fundamentally look at the balance between venture scale and impact, right? We're not it's $100 million ARR or it's going to die. We're not those. That's the SaaS guys, right? We're like, hey, because our portfolio is designed differently, like how do we build a great $25, $50 million ag company that's going to go to John Deere? It's not going to be us scaling it to that point. And how do we fill that gap to be their innovation pipeline by validating that like it's on their roadmap and it's on our roadmap? So we do a lot of work with corporates and to create joint studios and say, give us like what you are seeing out there for 10 years. We'll go do all the entrepreneurial stuff. It's very cheap to hire us. And then we'll go create a company. You might want to invest in it. And then we'll go incubate it because we can do that. You can't. Your legal team will not let you run a pilot in the field, right? Corporate. But we'll go build a startup company that has venture scale economics, value proposition, customers want it. And then maybe it turns out you might want to acquire it. Great. Maybe you don't. Cool, right? We only form companies that have lots of criteria, but venture scale, high trend growth, and an opportunity for an M&A. Yeah. We have one maybe IPO type company, but yeah. Do we have time?
Yes.
Oh, all right, cool. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and from everyone at CoMotion Labs, a big thank you to Amish. Our next series begin again on Friday, January 10th at noon. Sign up today, and we'll see you next year. Thank you.